EMFs, electromagnetic fields, a pernicious health risk. But how do they damage your health? Hi, this is Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today we are beyond honored and privileged to have someone to talk to and help educate us on this topic. And I believe there's very few people I've interviewed. I've interviewed a lot of people, but very few who I believe truly deserve a Nobel Prize for his pioneering research in this area to help us understand and identify the mechanism of how electromagnetic fields damage our cell. He's uniquely gifted to do this because he has training in physics and biochemistry, and I think one of them is from Caltech and the other is from Johns Hopkins, so two very prestigious universities, and then he's also a professor emeritus at Washington State University. And the man is Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, and you're in for an engaging, amazing conversation, so welcome.
I'll show that EMFs work by activating what are called voltage-gated calcium channels. These are channels in the outer membrane of the cell, the plasma membrane that surrounds all of our cells. And when they're activated, they open up and they allow calcium to flow into the cell. It's the excess calcium in the cell which is responsible for most, if not all, of biology.
Yeah, and let's stop there in your journey, because that was the original. I mean, there's hundreds of studies that show that when you expose cells to EMFs, there's increased intracellular calcium.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's indisputable. That's just fact.
Yeah, and you also get increases in calcium signaling, which is very important.
Well, maybe you can go some of the more details, because you had mentioned the heating effect, or what's commonly referred to in the literature as the thermal effect. The
Right.
industry only believes it's a thermal. Your research shows clearly it's a non-thermal. But let's go into the mechanism of what happens. What do these calcium channels do? They open up, they allow calcium ions to go into the cell, which are really low concentration normally. But when they hit the EMFs, they open up and they put 1 million ions a second per channel into the cell and cause this molecular biological trauma that you figured out. So why don't you go into that?
Well, okay. Let me just say one other thing before we go. Okay. One of the other things about this is that these voltage-gated calcium channels, and I abbreviate them VGCCs, have in their structure something called the voltage sensor. This is a structure which detects electrical changes across the plasma membrane and opens the channel. So the obvious thing is that the EMFs are working through the voltage sensor to activate the channel. And what is true, and this comes out of the physics, is that because of the structure of the voltage sensor and its location in the plasma membrane, one can predict from basic physics it's extraordinarily sensitive to the electrical forces from these EMFs. And the forces are approximately 7.2 million times stronger on the voltage sensor than they are on singly charged electrical groups that are in the watery parts of the cell, the aqueous parts of the cell, which is where most of them are. So there are extraordinary forces on this thing, and that's how these very weak EMFs, which again industry claims can't do anything, are working. They're working by activating this, and that's critical.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's one of your major findings. And really, I just want to restate that in a way that some people may better appreciate, that the consequence of that assessment, which you put together, means that the safety standards that are in existence today are off by a factor of over 7 million. They're 7 million times off.
Yeah, okay. So then the question is, as you raised, so what happens next? How does this lead to what we call effects? And so there are a number of things that we know when you have excess calcium in the cell happen. And so one of the things is that you get excess calcium signaling. And one of the things that's critical in that is you get increases in nitric oxide. The nitric oxide can react with superoxide, and superoxide levels also go up in response to increased calcium in the cell, intracellular calcium. And they form peroxynitrite, which is a potent oxidant. It's not a free radical, but it breaks down to form reactive free radicals.
It's a reaction in the details, and this is part of the solution. I think it's not oxidative stress. The adjective that needs to be inserted is excessive oxidative stress, because there's a certain baseline free radical that's biologically useful and necessary. Like nitric oxide is a free radical; you need it, but it's excessive nitric oxide, especially from stimulating the EMF, that causes the damage. The excessive oxidative stress. You have the decrease in fertility, but you also have, you mentioned the nervous system, the increased density there, but you didn't mention the consequences of that. And there's 3 consequences, the A's, which should be anxiety, because their voltage-gated calcium channels are responsible for the neuroendocrine hormone release of neurotransmitters, anxiety, depression, autism, and Alzheimer's. So why don't you expand on that, because you gave a brilliant presentation at Autism 1.
If we can go on to the autism question, there is a lot of evidence that excessive calcium has a key role in autism, and I think what we need to do then is to talk about what some of those, the way in which this excessive calcium works to cause autism.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Does that sound like a good start anyway?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
I know, there's a lot to this, but with the effects directly on what you see, is it relating to autism? Like, how is it contributing so much to that?
Well, autism, let me just say, autism is an incredibly complex disease. And so I don't want to suggest that I'm trying to oversimplify it, because I'm not. But with all such diseases, you have to look for what things are most central to. And with autism, I think what is most central to the mechanism is disruption of the synapse formation in the developing brain. So during the perinatal period, the period that occurs before birth and after birth, there are very, very large numbers of synapses that are formed, that have to be formed properly for the brain to function properly. So there's a tremendous, during that time period, the brain is forming, huge numbers of synapses. And so anything that disrupts the formation of the proper synapses is going to cause serious problems. And I think that's basically what we're seeing with autism, is that that's going on. Now, and what is true is that there are 5 mechanisms which are known to regulate the formation of those synapses. And let me just tell you what they are. There's the formation of dendritic outgrowth. So the neurons in the brain that are developing have to form these outgrowths to form synapses. Then you get synapse formation, you get synapse maturation, you get synapse elimination, because sometimes you get the wrong synapses initially formed and you got to get rid of them. And then there's another function, which is MCP2 function, which also has a role in this whole process. All 5 of those things are regulated by intracellular calcium. All 5 of them. And so what that means is that anything that gives you excessive calcium in the cell, inappropriate levels of calcium in the cell, or even low calcium levels in the cell, can produce autism, or at least an autism-like effect, because through those impacts on the synapse formation. That's the kind of central argument that I've made, and I think is the central thing in autism. The average neuron in the brain has about 1,000 synaptic connections. And if I remember correctly, you've got something like 10 to the 9th neurons or something in the brain. Anyway, you got huge numbers. So we're talking about absolutely astronomical numbers of synapses. And, every one of them doesn't have to be right for the brain to function, but you've got to have a lot of right connections. So this is a very complex area, and it's something which is anything that disrupts the formation of the synapses can have these very powerful effects. And let me just say one other thing about this. There is some reason to think that, and I suspect your program has probably talked about these a lot, that even though the initial effects in causing autism occur during this perinatal period, that things that occur later can produce substantial improvements in the situation. So it's not that because there's damage you necessarily that it's all going to be forever. Nevertheless, it's a very complex thing, and it's not. This is a huge thing, and what we need to do, of course, is to avoid the kinds of exposures that cause autism. Now, and the world and our government is making it more and more difficult to do that with each passing day. Dr. Tori Gelter, who's a physician in California, has found that with her patients, her autism patients, that if she puts them into a low EMF environment, she gets very substantial improvements in them. And so in that situation, even though there were changes produced during the perinatal period, after that period, you can still get effects from the EMFs, and you can get improvements by lowering EMF exposures, according to her experience. So, so there are lots of things that can come into this, and I think it's important to obviously to do everything you can to avoid these exposures.
I got one question on the DNA breaks. What do you believe causes more DNA breaks? Ionizing radiation in the air, gamma rays at 40,000 feet, or conventional X-rays or CAT scans, or regular use of the cell phone? It seems like from your literature, you're thinking it's the microwave radiation is going to cause more DNA breaks.
Well, yes, I do think that's true, and so the question is, what's the evidence of this? Mm-hmm. And so there were 3 studies that were published by a group in Germany, and the first study was done where they compared ionizing radiation, the equivalent of 1,600 chest X-rays. Mm-hmm. These were done in cell culture. They were done with, and they compared them with the DNA breaks that you got from what they described as 24 hours on a cell phone. Okay, and I'm going to tell you that it's actually not a cell phone here that was studied. And what they found was roughly equivalent amounts of DNA breaks from the two.
So 2 days on a cell phone equals 1,600 X-rays, DNA damage. In
24 hours, yeah. Okay, 1,600, chest X-rays, right.
In vitro assays.
That was what they found. Now, in fact, that underestimates the effects of cell phones. Okay. First, because they used a continuous wave EMF.
Oh, and it's not pulsed. Yeah.
And we know there's extensive evidence that the pulsed EMFs are much more damaging than the continuous wave EMFs. That's important for quite a number of reasons, including the fact that all wireless communication devices communicate via pulsations, and so they're much more dangerous because of that. And so then they published 2 other papers. One was they compared a pulsed EMF with a non-pulsed EMF and showed, yes, it was more active. And then they did a third paper, which is the paper that industry loves to hate, which was the senior author was Schwartz. So it's Schwartz et al. Paper. And these are all published in English, by the way. And in that paper, showed that when you use pulsations were designed to be similar to what the pulsations you get from a real cell phone, you got still much more damaging at much lower intensities. Ionizing radiation and the microwave frequency EMFs produce DNA damage through free radicals. Okay, so they're similar in that way. And the way in which you get the free radicals is through the peroxynitrite pathway. And it turns out that, when you go from the EMS to the free radicals on that pathway, there are 3 steps that involves high levels of amplification. So one of them is, as you mentioned before, when you open up the channels, you get about a million calcium ions flowing in per second. The second is that you get increases in nitric oxide and superoxide, and so those, in effect, the calcium's acting catalytically, because once it's in the cell and as long as it's elevated, you keep getting more and more of those things, and then those two react with each other to form peroxynitrite, and the reaction rate's the product of the two. So you have 3 levels of amplification. Well, you have 3 levels of amplification, you can get a hell of a response to a very small.
It is interesting because it's true. The industry is saying that there's not enough energy in a microwave radiation to cause direct damage to the covalent bonds in DNA. There isn't. The energy in it. It's only biological amplification resulting in excessive oxidative stress that causes it.
You get 3 levels of amplification with the microwave frequency EMFs, and so the amount of damage you get, based on those studies, is truly extraordinary. And of course,
But I want to get back to what we can do, because now that we've hopefully you have appropriate concern about this issue now. So what they can do, and I want you to help us understand, prioritize our exposures. So that would be really good to understand, because let me name the exposures. Cell phone towers, which I think are relatively low down on the list unless you're right next door to one. Cell phone towers, your cell phone, which is a huge one, Wi-Fi routers, Bluetooth headsets or any Bluetooth objects, the Internet of Things, smart thermostats, baby monitors, and I think what may be the most important, smart meters, and then one of the most important ones, which hardly anyone looks at, is actually the microwave itself.
All of those are bad. But the problem basically is the following. We know that, as I mentioned before, that the pulsed EMFs are, in most cases, much more active than the non-pulsed EMFs, or continuous wave EMFs. And but the other problem is
it microwave oven continuous or pulse? Is it continuous?
Well, it's pulsed, but it's pulsed basically because it runs off the 60 hertz current.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you have a particular kind of pulsation, and so it's not just a question of how much you've got, but how dangerous is that kind of pulsation versus other kinds of pulsation. So it's not an easy thing to compare. It's not an easy thing to say. I think in general, and this has been argued by a number of people, including Dimitris Panagopoulos in Greece, that in general, the more pulse things are, the more dangerous they are. But that's sort of and that's at least roughly right. But the problem we have, the fundamental problem we have, is that not one of these devices, not even once, are tested biologically for safety before they're put out to expose an unsuspecting public. They are never tested for safety. All the assurances of safety are based on this theory that they can only produce effects by heating. And we've known, if we were paying attention to the data, that was wrong 45 years ago.
And even with that flawed assessment, there's still warnings on every phone to hold it more than an inch away from your head.
That's right. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Which people don't know about.
Right.
Because they're in very fine print. Yeah, it's bizarre. And as you mentioned before, my best estimate of the safety guidelines is they're off by a factor of something like 7.2 million.
Yeah.
We're in an absolutely insane situation. I mean, it's just crazy.
But it's important to know, what I've neglected to mention is that your understanding of this came in 2012. You published in 2013. It was a highly cited article and still is, won an award.
If you wouldn't mind also turning, we should silence your phones, but if you want to turn them off like we do in the tent and go to airplane mode and turn Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off, I think it'll kind of have a calmer environment for us. And I'm really glad I'm not wearing a wireless mic. I'm usually up here speaking, talking about wireless, wearing a wireless mic, which feels a little hypocritical. All right, let's see. Let's get into it. This is the Succeed Room. Let's succeed. My background, I lived and worked in Silicon Valley since 1990, so I am a tech person. I was a troubleshooter. Originally, I was a customer support person for supercomputers and workstations. Then I became an engineer, a software engineer, and eventually a software designer. I had a passion for empowering people with personal technology. I used to meet with like Tony Fadell, who later designed the iPhone in the mid-90s. I wrote papers about personal technology at Stanford and attributes of it. So I really, and my goal at the time on my resume was to empower people with personal technology. That has not exactly gone the way we all thought it would. Okay, and so we all had really good intentions, and a lot of the people who originally did that, including myself, we're working towards something even better. I mean, if they were really empowering us, we'd be calm and masterful. And that is not kind of what's going on. So I did have two boys with developmental delays, autism symptoms, sensory issues. And I had multiple chronic health issues myself. And it took me a while to figure out that they were both related. So this is me in 2009, 20 pounds lighter than I am now. I'm about 150 pounds. This is me at 131 pounds. I systematically looked at everything, right? I was looking at everything I could look at, and I didn't want to be, I know at the time, 10 or so years ago, we had Inconvenient Truth coming out, and you had people in Texas or something denying, because they worked in oil and gas, denying there was climate change. And I said, well, I don't want to be one of those people that doesn't look at their own stuff, right? I want to make sure that I, objectively step back and, look at everything. Because I was actually starting to have problems getting a cell phone next to my head. I would start to feel it, and my body was basically at the time, my body felt like there was a problem with the tech, but my brain was saying, oh, it's fine, it's all well tested. Well, someone was wrong, and it was my head, okay? So, technology exposure is one of the last things I looked at, but may have had the largest impact, and probably one of the first things I would do now, starting to detox kids and adults too. So I'm going to do a little bit of a quick thing about the biology, autism, the biology, and the environment. Just so you know why this links in. Like, you may think, well, why is this related to autism? What's going on? It's actually one of the highest, to me, this is one of the kind of the most clear links. So there are more than 1,000 genetic risk factors now for autism. But the largest cluster in a study that Martha Herbert did a couple years ago of 600 of them was in calcium channel signaling. Are people familiar with calcium channel signaling? A little bit? Okay. So the calcium channels are voltage gated. So they're ion channels that are on the cell membrane, and voltage opens and closes them. So you start to see why maybe electrical stuff might be a bit of an issue here? Okay, voltage gated. So what do these things do? I knew about calcium channels for a long time, and I knew kind of whatever, but I didn't understand what they did actually. And so just to give you a little bit of the purpose, calcium channels excites the neuron. So we don't want to be, there are times when you really do not want to miss something. When your life is in danger, or there's a really big reward going on, first date, I don't know, there's a lot of interesting times when you're going to be on it. And so your body excites the system so that you err on the side of, not missing a thing, okay? But of course, that's a really intense state to be in. A lot of our kids are in that state all the time. It's a really intense state to be in, and it's very, it drains a lot of power from the body. And you all know when you kind of finish a talk or something, then you kind of relax and things dial back down. Well, our kids don't, that doesn't happen with our kids in general. So they're all kind of jacked up because they've got a lot of calcium channel firing. So it gets you into this more sensitive and high-strung state. Does that sound like anybody we know? Including the parents. Okay, so exactly. So let's talk about autism risks and symptoms. We talked about the genetics and calcium channel. Brain development is clearly an issue. Oxidative stress is a risk factor. Sensory issues, inflammation, blood-brain barrier breaching, gut issues, immune system issues. What's common to all these? Calcium channel signaling. Very obscure paper that came out in 2007. I can't even find the author at this point. It wasn't really published. But to me, it was brilliant, and really it was about calcium channel pathology. And it really, wow, we've got a full house. Thank you guys for coming so much. So that paper was just remarkable for me. Martin Pall sent that to me, and I just kind of started putting things together, and people don't talk about this so much. So the calcium channels, it is confusing. You see all these symptoms all over the place, but there is kind of one common pathway that's most suspect. So Martha Herbert introduced me to the concept of total load theory, or allostatic load. Patty Lemur has talked about this as well, who wrote the book Outsmarting Autism. I think pioneered the term. And she thinks of autism not as a, she thinks of autism as a state, not a trait. So it's not a lifetime trait. It's not a genetic thing that you're going to be in forever. It's more like being in bankruptcy or being in debt, right? So it's a temporary state, and if you're overloaded, you're going to stay in that state. And there's many factors. So if you have, let's say, a vaccine injury, you do not get a get out of jail free card for glyphosate. And that was one of my biggest problems is, as a troubleshooter, I was used to seeing computers fail with one thing, and I over-focused on mercury for about 15 years. And then I've really broadened my horizons to look at and realize that it's not about one environmental factor, but maybe it is about one pathway in the body that's suspect and that can be impacted by multiple environmental factors. So when I go to a conference now, people would go to a conference and say, oh, it's this, it's this, it's this. And now I say, instead of fighting over it's this and this, I say, yes, and. Yes, it's glyphosate, and this, and this. It's all of these things together. So it's not a fight. So the calcium channels are a key point of focus of overload. They're excited and calmed by a wide range of factors, both environmental and physiological. So again, an excited state of overload can be considered excitotoxicity. So too much internal calcium can cause oxidative stress and even DNA damage and mitochondrial damage. And this is how, I think of the nervous system now. You've heard of people saying, oh, that person's high strung. So I tend to think of I like to think of the nervous system like a stringed instrument, like a musical instrument, and you can tune it up and down. And just like a musician tunes before they start playing, we really need to take time to make sure we get in the right state. And I know a lot of people with sensory issues, we've talked a lot about regulation. And we do all these sensory things to get you in regulation. But there are a lot of physiological things you can do and a lot of environmental things that can play with this as well. Imagine you're a musician and someone comes up and starts detuning your violin as you're playing. Well, that's kind of the way EMF works. You're sitting there and getting overexcited, and you don't know, there's this invisible thing, you have no idea what's going on. So some of the things that tune down calcium signaling, magnesium downregulates. If you're low in magnesium, your calcium channels will be hyperactive. B12, B6, folate, glutathione, balanced minerals, having enough mineral balance. Sounds like things that we kind of have been using in the field, right? Things that excite the nervous system, wireless and EMF, toxic metals. There's a metal ion receptor called the Midas on the outside of the calcium channel, and that can get screwed up and screw up the signal, how the signaling works. Roundup can excite the nervous system directly through the calcium channels or through the NDMA receptor, that's a glutamate receptor. MSG, right? Any kids do well on MSG? Right. Infections. Okay, now you're starting to see, well, how does this stuff all go together? Infections, inflammation, low glutathione, low minerals, and more. So you can start to see that you have an ability to maybe start tuning your children like stringed instruments and yourself. Okay, so this is the total load theory that we talked about with, that Patty Lima and Martha Herbert have been talking a lot about. And again, it's not just one thing. And as I spent 15 years with a lot of time and resources trying to recover my kids, I was doing things all over the map, and I was trying to think how to coherently pull this all together, and I realized there were some categories of things that were happening. Now, you're either treating, usually everyone just jumps in and you treat the child themselves, right? You're either removing something bad or adding something good, right? And then also with the environment, you can remove something bad or add something good. And there's something kind of in between, Dr. Klinghardt works on a lot too, is like the autonomic nervous system. So your body can be stuck in fight or flight mode, which is not a state, or it can over or underreact to some environmental factor, or it can even stop regulating. So it could just kind of shut down and not really correctly tune itself to the environment. So so when I think of recovering my kids now, what I kind of recommend is kind of a process of creating a safe environment first and going down through all these loads on the right and lightening those loads, and then focusing on, so now you've created a safe environment, and then you want your child to feel safe and dial out of fight or flight mode with various mechanisms, breathing, craniosacral therapy, etc. So getting into out of fight or flight mode where you're not going to detox, your brain doesn't even have, the front of your brain doesn't even have access to circulation as much. It's all in the back in reactive mode. So get back into rest, digest, healing, parasympathetic mode. And then we can start playing around with the normal, what do we call it, biomedical training, the normal biomedical stuff. So a lot of times we jump in and do the biomedical right away, but I would say if I was doing it all again, and my doctor and I both kind of said, geez, we did everything, we got results, but we actually did everything backwards, I would completely do it differently. So I did it all backwards and totally screwed up, and I still got really good results. So I hope you guys do a better job, and that's my job here, to kind of pass on that knowledge. Okay, so you create this environment, and then hopefully you get kind of a lightening, and you lighten the load, and you see your child go back from being overloaded to having an abundance of support factors. So, wow, is this the whole thing? Okay, so I think we got a little bit more than this. So I have some talks and references that we have on the internet. So, and as a matter of fact, this whole talk is already referenced as well, I think, on the internet. Actually, I haven't uploaded yet. So Simplifying Autism Improvement and Recovery is a booklet that we have down at our booth downstairs. And that's everything that I wish I could have shared with my past self back in 2002 and 2003. So if I could just go back in time, like Interstellar, did you guys see that movie? If you could go back inside and say, like, give something to yourself in time and say, don't worry, it's all going to be okay, do this. That's the booklet. And it goes with a talk I did called, Simplifying Autism Improvement Recovery. I had another talk at AES called Simplifying Autism, Removing Barriers, where I took that talk and combined it with another talk called Autism in Your Home, where I went through not just EMF, but all these environmental factors in your home, like one slide for everything, for water, for air quality, for lights. And so if you really want to do a quick scan, you can look at that talk, or we have a little pamphlet downstairs at our booth on that talk as well. The paper, Martin Pall's paper, or actually this is his talk at Autism 1. He came for about 2 or 3 years to Autism 1 conference. He's an expert on the calcium channels, biophysicist. He did a paper, EMFs, or he did a talk at Autism 1. EMFs and chemicals is the 2 main drivers of the autism epidemic, mechanisms of action. So if you really want to see how this all, if you really like to nerd out on the biophysics of things, then watch that talk. And also, I have a link called Autism and EMF Published Research. All right, thanks, Michelle. Or we got 15 more minutes. And we're going to try to end quite early and take a lot of questions, because usually when I talk about this topic, I can talk about this topic for 10 minutes and then do 3 hours of questions. Because once you get it, you start going, what do I do next, right? We'll talk a little bit about autism and wireless and some of the historical background. So Dr. Klinghardt did a pilot study in 2002. So Dr. Klinghart's up in Seattle. He had a very interesting clientele. He had a lot of Microsoft people and then non-tech people, and he noticed all the autism cases were coming from the tech people. And so he was a little suspect. He also had a friend he was living with at the time who was a building biologist who knew about electric fields and magnetic fields and EMF. And so they did a little pilot study, and they found basically that the neurotypical kids had dramatically lower levels of exposure than in the mom's pregnancy environment and in the baby's sleep environment for electric fields and wireless levels. And in 2013, Martha Herbert and Cindy Sage, Martha Herbert from Harvard, Cindy Sage, worked together collaboratively on a paper I asked them to do. I kind of said, I'm hearing about calcium channels in autism, I'm hearing about calcium channels in EMF research. Is this something going on here? Right now, at the time in 2010, they said 1 in 100 people were electrosensitive. It's like, well, wait, this sounds a lot like autism. So I asked Martha Herbert to look at the research, and she called me back swearing. And she's pretty fun. She was actually really thrown off by some very serious effects, like blood-brain barrier breaches and genetic damage that she didn't really know existed. She didn't know were peer-reviewed and published studies. So we have things like In autism, we have de novo mutations, so we have non-inherited mutations that frequently come from the dad's side. So we're looking for genotoxic environmental factors or lifestyle factors. So cell phone in the pocket, laptop in the lap is a major concern for autism. And if we only do one thing to prevent autism, I would say it's really protect the dad's sperm, especially, so in the preconception phase. And the rest, a lot of the stuff we can repair after. We know we can fix kids, but I don't want to pass on a gene. If you've had millions of years of evolving genes, I don't want to pass in some random spurious defect just because of a cell phone. So we have sperm damage from EMF exposure, we have inflammation, we have calcium channel problems, we have reduced melatonin in autism, we have reduced melatonin from EMF exposure, we have increased oxidation from autism and EMF exposure, we have decreased immune system, and we have increased seizures. Basically what Martha Herbert said, the known symptoms of autism match known symptoms from EMF exposure. Now we're not claiming that this is the only thing, it's a yes and, right, with all the other things that you know. And that paper was published in 2013. I said, oh, great, the information's going to get out there, everyone's going to know, I can relax. No, okay. So I got Martin Pall. So finally at that, I kind of realized, this is not going to happen on its own. I talked to Martin Pall in 2014, and he was saying the same thing, that he kind of was coming to the conclusion that calcium channels and autism, he basically talked about the same things we just talked about. And I said, we have got to get, you speaking at a conference or something. And so in 2015, we went to Autism 1, and I spoke and did like a parents version, and Martin Pall did kind of the super nerd biophysics version of this. And so if you like to nerd out, again, here's his talk. And he talked about chemicals activating the MDMA receptors, which is a glutamate receptor. And that's why the low glutamate diet works really well. And so again, both of these mechanisms lead to intracellular calcium and damage and increased inflammation. So now what do? We've got 10 minutes left, and let's figure out what we're going to actually do. So how do you, so does that make sense to you now? That's a really fast boom why we're talking about this issue and why I think it's I think it's the most credible issue for autism, and I think it's one of the most credible suspects that we have, and it's not getting as much traction as I think I'd like to see. So, and we still don't have exact proof that this is the issue. We don't have a full study. I'm working with Martha Herbert on that. But I would say it's such a strong suspect that you should be dialing down your exposures now. And we're actually getting pretty dramatic results as well, and we'll talk about that maybe in the other talk. So we evolved in the Earth's magnetic field, in the Earth's field. It's a big magnetic field. And it's not just static, it varies with lightning strikes in the ionosphere. It goes at about 7.83 hertz, which is our alpha brainwave level. So it's kind of like a drum beat for our bodies and for our brains. And we're used to that. It's a nice smooth wave, and it keeps us all connected. But now we actually live inside, and we're a little bit closer to these man-made fields. And they're 60 hertz, and they don't vary around like lightning does or like a babbling brook. They're kind of dun 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 like Jaws, 60 hertz. And so we've had these fields coming in the house for a while now, for decades, and we've had magnetic fields and electric fields, and they're coming from different directions now, and they're different frequencies. And sometimes they're a little noisy, and sometimes they have digital square waves in them that our bodies don't really like, or sometimes they have little spiky peaks in them that our bodies can feel. And you can see that, since the 80s especially, things have really dialed up. Similar, interesting time frame to the autism rise. The health effects of wireless, not just autism, but I think for the parents as well, and parents and other friends and so forth, the most common symptom reported is insomnia, sleep disruption. The second most common is ringing in the ears, headaches, fight or flight mode or overexcitation, attention problems, memory problems. I always joke that I had all these things except I don't remember having memory problems. Reproductive harm, and DNA damage and more. So I have a quick list of items, I think about 25 items. Well, we might not have time for questions. I'm going to go through this quickly, so we have 5 minutes. So here are things that are in your home that you want to kind of start focusing on first, like wearables. The closest things to your body will have the biggest impact. So if you have a fitness tracker, especially a Fitbit, smartwatches, AirPods, headphones that are wireless, turn those off or move them away. If you have a location tracker, if your kid's a runner, a wearable or carried unit, that can be a factor. And if you really, really want that, but you want to mitigate exposure, I can help with that a little bit too, talking about that. Electric blanket, motorized adjustable bed, baby monitor is actually a very big concern, as those went from analog to digital in the 80s. Cell phones, not near the bed, tablets or iPads. If you have a digital assistant, they're quite high and constant emitters. Cordless phone base stations, Wi-Fi router, LED plug-in clock can frequently be a migraine headache, magnetic field issue. Lamp or reading light, even when it's off, can be a big electric field. Power strip or extension cord, transformers, those little plug-in electronics, have big magnetic fields. Television, especially the streaming devices. And these are, you don't have to write this down. We have these printed out downstairs at our booth, so you can just chill. Everything's all good. I know, I get so stressed about this. All right, you're not gonna miss anything. I'm gonna take care of you guys. Desktop or laptop computer, your refrigerator is a big magnetic field, especially these newer, and then also these smart refrigerators. A lot of these smart appliances are wireless all the time. So electrical appliances in general, so humidifiers, air conditioners, heaters, air filters, aquarium pumps. Your electric meter itself, especially if you have a smart meter, well, the electric meter, the panel or sub-panel, radiant electric floor heating can be a big magnetic field. A smart meter can be a big issue. A wireless alarm system, a lot of people have those. And dimmer switches can create a lot of dirty electricity, and almost all of us have those. And three-way light switches can create, the way they're wired creates a big magnetic field. So if you can turn a light on from two different places, that's a three-way switch. Okay, and then also fluorescent compact lights and LED lights can, not only are they noisy potentially and flickering light, but they create dirty electricity. So noise in our electric systems. So we do have some basic meters you can get to start measuring these things. So we've got those down at the booth. I don't think we're going to have time to pull them out and play with them, but you can play with them downstairs if you want to take a meter home. And we have I'm starting to do simplified instructions that says turn this on, do this, and you can start recording these levels in the different areas and creating a radar graph. This is from the Autism 1 conference. It was generally fairly low except for the wireless levels. So at this conference, we're in the yellow zone for wireless. So we're a little bit calmer here. And you can also, if this feels a little overwhelming to you, and it is very technical, you can hire a building biologist to measure your home or school. And they can also help you with complex shielding and mitigation issues. And this is it. So we got about 3 or 4 minutes left. So I have resources. So this talk is at clv.us/autism.wireless. I haven't uploaded it yet, but I will upload the slides. Amanda, can you remind me to do that? Where did Amanda go? In the back. Okay, thanks, Amanda. And then we have our website, clearlightventures.com. We have a wireless safety card. I think Amanda put them on, or no, which one did you put on everyone's seat? The safety card or both? Oh, yeah, I know. Okay, got it. So you should have had stuff on your seat, the card and the Autism in Your Home pamphlet. We got extra literature. We're trying to clear it out for new versions. We also have a Facebook. It's a complex topic, and so you just need somebody to coach you through it. We have a Facebook group, EMF and Autism. We've got over 2,000 parents in the group, and some electrosensitive adults, and EMF experts who just all help each other. There's a simple book that starts that if you want to if you'd like to read about this in more detail. The book is the Non-Tinfoil Hat Guide to EMFs. I'm not a big fan of the title, but the book is clear and well written. And when I did a film, I helped executive produce a film called Generation Zap that you can find on iTunes and Amazon.